It's a poem to start from the German poet Rainer Maria Rilke. I believe in all that has never yet been spoken. I want to free what waits within me so that what no one has dared to wish for may for once spring clear without my contriving. If this is arrogant, God, forgive me, but this is what I need to say. May what I do flow from me like a river. No forcing and no holding back, the way it is with children. Then in these swelling and ebbing currents, these deepening tides moving out, returning, I will sing you as no one ever has, streaming through widening channels into the open sea. May what I do flow from me like a river, no forcing and no holding back, the way it is with children. As we've been preparing for this Canvas season, this annual Canvas time, I heard a little bit about Fran's Canvas sermon from last year. Who was there for that? I'm just curious. Oh, not that many of you. Okay, good. Well, let me recap then. She said that most of us would probably rather talk about our bowel movements or our sex lives than about money. Is that true for you? Maybe just one of them? I've been trying to order them. I'm not sure. But there's a truth here. Amidst the humor, it's tough to talk about money. So why? Why all of this blockage? Why all of this shame about money? I'm going to share a couple of stories about my childhood, about how I learned not to talk about money. And before I tell the stories, I have to tell you that I let my mom know that I'm going to be telling these stories. And I promised I'd share some other stories about her another time. She was happy for me too. So I was in elementary school, and I had just found out somehow, I don't even remember how much money my mom made, as a lawyer, but not a real lawyer, a bar review professor. She said that when she made that transition, she went from making as much as she did as a trial lawyer to back what she made just out of law school, being a bar review professor. But it was her money or her life. But I don't remember how it came up or anything else really that happened that day. What I do remember is the emotional gravity of my mom telling me, as I mentioned, the amount that she made, not to talk about that with anyone else. Not to say that at school. I can still remember with crystal clarity her grave admonition, and in the moment I didn't really understand it. I only understood that it was important because of her serious tone, and eventually I had some ideas about why. But for now, for our purposes, I just want you to hold on to that experience, that naive child's confusing experience of discovering that something that held so much importance, I knew we were relying on this, was also something to be held a secret. Secrets and money. The only thing that I ever remember either of my moms asking me to keep secret from the other one also had to do about money. Because of this, to this day, when I'm walking to my car and I know that the meter has run out, or I have perhaps overstayed the time zone limit, I feel a nervous flutter in my chest, a temporary bout of panic if I see anything resembling that dreaded slip of paper under the window shield wiper. Because, see, one of my moms would experience such agony over paying the, in her mind, completely unnecessary expense of a parking ticket that my other mom would do whatever she could to keep the parking tickets she got a secret. I remember I was well trained by the time I was 10, not only not to mention the ticket that we had gotten while out running errands, but to keep an eye out for that reminder notice that inevitably came in the mail. ensure it was disposed of discreetly. And at this point, we laugh about it in our family. And I've trained myself to quickly release the panic I feel when I notice that revolting notice on my car. And to instead imagine, I actually do this, I imagine that the money I'll pay for that fine making its way downstream to city services that I really, really, really want to have happen. So schools and libraries, I'm sure that's where that money is going. Maybe it's even just like a little extra carbon tax on my consumptive driving lifestyle. So all of these messages, all the messages that we receive about money growing up, shaped by the culture, by the times, by family stories, by family wealth or lack thereof, all the messages that tell us much more than what to do with money, how to feel about money. They are often framed as instructional. A penny saved is a penny earned. And yet, the deeper message is about how to feel. Be cautious. There is something dangerous about spending your money now. Are there other adages, other messages that you recall learning about money growing up? Could be common cultural messages or messages that you got in your family. Often it's actually hard to pinpoint exactly where these ideas came from. Would you be willing to just call out a few of these? What just kind of messages that you got about money growing up? They could be common adages or otherwise. Money doesn't grow on trees, yeah. What else? A fool and their money are dearly parted.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. Uh-huh. Yeah. What was that one? Flat to stack. It's made flat to stack. Got it. Oh, yeah, I didn't get that one. That's a good one. Of all evil. The money is the root of all evil. Yes. We could go on, right? We could go on and on and on. There's countless ones of these. So one of the teachings that comes from a spiritual practice that Emily and I have both gotten a lot out of called interplay is to make a habit of distinguishing between external authority and internal authority. These messages that we have just called out, these truisms or adages, they are examples of external authority, right? They are what we've been told is true about money. They're inherited cultural and family wisdom. They are potentially internalized, like we may have even come to agree with many of them through our own lived experience. Sometimes it's not easy to differentiate between indoctrination and the inner information that we each have that comes from experience. And sometimes there's even a pressure externally or internally to set aside inner information that conflicts with those external messages. But it is a tenet of our faith tradition that the truth of our own lived experience has as much to say about ultimate reality as any external source. This is a bedrock Unitarian thought. In the study of Unitarian preaching, we call it text as sacred, life as sacred text. That our lives can be sacred text. So I invite you now to take a moment to reflect on the sacred text of your life, on your own internal experience of money, your own lived truths, whether they align with or conflict with those external messages. I'm not going to ask you to call this out. I just want you to think about what has your inner experience taught you about money. One of my experiences of money is that despite messages that I should always be worried about it running out, there has in fact always been enough in my life. And still, even knowing that, it can be challenging to dwell in gratitude for that truth rather than in fear that keeps me vigilant about the monthly budget. And of course, there is real wisdom in those messages, in those external authorities. At the very least, it's important to know the rules of the game. And at least, and at least sometimes, if not often, it is important to follow our internal wisdom if we want to have lives with fullness and ease. So it's a balancing act, these external authority and internal authority. But there's one area where I think that the external messages about money are way out of balance. One result of much of the external wisdom about money is to experience a sense of scarcity, to constrict and tighten and clench around money. Right? This is what keeps us from talking about it. It's what makes it uncomfortable. I remember when my mom was first introduced to the idea of scarcity mentality, this kind of theological idea, when she was in seminary. I was a teenager. I think it just totally clicked for her. She was clear that changing from a mentality of scarcity to one of abundance could change her life, could change other lives, could change the world if we made this switch. And so one night we were having family dinner around the table, and my brother and I, we were squabbling over the last of whatever it was, and my mom's face got red, and she pounded on the table, and what I remember as a shout, she said, "There will be no scarcity mentality in this household." I don't think she's ever going to live it down, that one. But our response to scarcity, maybe it was a helpful survival strategy at some point, right? When there actually wasn't enough to go around, not enough food, possible that we're maybe hardwired, maybe it's an evolutionary feature for making it through hard times. But while global hunger is a rampant reality, countless studies have shown we already produce more than enough food to feed everyone on the planet. Some even showing, you're probably familiar with this, 150%, perhaps. And billions go hungry? That's not scarcity. That's not the problem. The scarcity mentality is the problem. The scarcity mentality that underlies greed and hoarding, that justifies dire poverty in our city centers just minutes away from extreme affluence in our suburbs. The influential anti-poverty and anti-hunger activist Lynn Twist wrote about the dynamic of scarcity mentality in her book, The Soul of Money. It's a wonderful book if you have an interest. Beyond just money, we have conditioned ourselves to feel scarcity in regards to all of our resources, is what she says. How often have you woken up in the morning, like she says she does most mornings still, seen the clock and had as your first thought, I didn't get enough sleep. This is a very common one in my life right now. Followed shortly by a mental scan of the day, accompanied by the thought, oh, I don't have enough time. Whether true or not, Twist writes, that thought of not enough occurs to us automatically before we even think to question or examine it. It's deep in there. She goes on, we spend most of the hours and the days of our lives hearing, explaining, complaining, worrying about what we don't have enough of. We don't have enough time, we don't have enough rest, we don't have enough exercise, we don't have enough work, we don't have enough profits, we don't have enough power, we don't have enough wilderness, we don't have enough weekends. Of course, we don't have enough money, ever. We're not thin enough, we're not smart enough, we're not pretty enough, or fit enough, or educated, or successful enough, or rich enough, ever. But before we even sit up in bed, Before our feet touch the floor, she writes, we're already inadequate, already lacking something. This is the feel of scarcity. And it's not about us as individuals, it's a cultural story that we've inherited. She goes on to name that there's 3 myths of this mindset of scarcity. The first is that there's not enough. Right, that's the basic premise. There's not enough. Whatever it is, there's a danger of running out so that some will get it and some will not. It's a lie, she says. The second, more is better. Once we're convinced that there's not enough to go around, it's only natural to assume that our job is to get as much for ourselves and our people, whoever that might be, as possible. And then the third myth of the scarcity mentality is that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. And this is where helplessness, and then hopelessness, and then cynicism sets in. That's just how the world works. It's a numbing story. A story that locks in the clenched tightness of that scarcity mentality. Keeps us from talking about it, keeps us from changing it. And it also doesn't help that those of us who do have enough, or sometimes even more than enough, get stuck with feelings that make it hard for us to start unclenching, right? Again, thinking from the perspective of evolutionary psychology, social theorist Jeremy Rifkin sees empathy as a hallmark trait of humankind. This is empathy. Empathy is, you can look at the whole history of humanity through the lens of empathy. And the understanding from contemporary neuroscience backs this up of mirror neurons. Are you familiar with this idea of mirror neurons? That we have neurons inside of us that when we see someone else jump, for instance, we feel, our mirror neurons go off and we feel a hint of that sensation of jumping ourselves. So it's getting clear, empathy is hardwired. And because of that, I believe it's on some level impossible not to feel some shame when we know that we have more than enough while others live in dire poverty. We distract ourselves from it. We have all sorts of justifications for why things are the way they are, many of which are certainly rational, even ethical justifications. I remember buying my first suits. It was just after that tremendous earthquake in Haiti a number of years ago. The news was a constant stream of horrific stories about the impact of that natural disaster on an already thoroughly impoverished country. I walked out into the parking lot with $1,000 worth of clothes in my hands. Clothes I was purchasing so that I could dress like a minister and follow my calling to help heal the world. And the dissonance was too much. I sat for several minutes in the car, sobbing, weeping, overwhelmed with guilt and shame over my privilege and the state of the world. I'm so glad that I had friends that evening to talk to who understood the disconnect that I was feeling, friends who could hold the experience with me, who could hold the bigger picture with me, release me from a personal shame, an individual shame. Because the truth about shame is that it only leads to further clenching. It leads to not talking about money, leads to it being a secret, which of course reinforces the shame. That's how shame and secrets work. So what's the alternative? May what I do flow from me like a river. No forcing and no holding back, the way it is with children. The boy in the story, boy, it's all so contrived and well put together, that story, but he lived that way. No forcing and no holding back. Without any mentality of scarcity, he didn't know he should clench and hold on to the valuable things that he had. He had so little, and yet he was able to trust the needs present in the moment, the needs right in front of him. He trusted those as a source of guidance and wisdom more than he trusted the desire to hold on to what he had. He does not try to push the river or hold it back, to bend it to his will. He does not try to contrive a way to get the drum, the way it is with children. So how do we get from scarcity to the river? There are many answers, but I think that one important aspect, and this is what I'm encouraging us to start today, is to talk about it. To talk about money even though it's uncomfortable. I think that aligning our values and our resources requires a constant process of surfacing the subconscious, of reflecting on the deep stories that influence our choices and behaviors, making meaning, a new meaning about them together. So like Mark mentioned, sometime soon a canvasser will contact you and ask to have a conversation. My hope is that it can be a real conversation. A chance to share about what this church means to you, why you choose to prioritize it in your life. I hope it's also an opportunity to talk about the challenging questions that go into choosing how much to pledge. Am I giving enough? Am I giving too much? Am I pulling more than my share of the weight here? These are questions that come up. And feelings. Embarrassment, perhaps, that my income is fixed and I cannot increase my pledge, not last year, not this year, not any year. Embarrassment, or maybe it's frustration or resentment that I'm asked yet again. Can we trust each other enough to be real? To be real with one another in these conversations, to share our honest truth, our honest struggles, to let these conversations flow from us like a river. No forcing and no holding back. And thinking again about that idea of external authority and internal authority from another light, there are many things that we spend our money on based on external authority. Right? Your taxes, insurance, utilities, these are external authority, externally made decisions about where to put your money. There are many things like that. My plea to you is this: don't let your canvas pledge be one of them. Even though you're asked by someone else, I hope that you base your commitment to this community, your pledge, on internal authority. Use external wisdom as needed to figure out how much is just right, but let your giving be driven by your internal clarity. That giving to this institution, to the mission that we gather to serve, to the vision of the future that we hold together, is a way of aligning your resources with your values. Don't do it because I'm telling you to it. Do it because you know that's true for yourself. So let's start talking about it right now. I'm going to ask you to talk to one another again like we did a few weeks ago, and I promise I'm not going to do this all the time, but it's important today. So we're going to start a conversation that will continue downstairs over lunch. I want you to think to start about a time that you regretted a way that you used your money. Something that you spent your money on, or a way that your money flowed out from you that you didn't feel good about. Do you have one? All right, so if you will, just turn to the person next to you. It's okay if you end up in a group of three, and just share about that time. I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to go back and forth, and then I'm going to ring the bell to bring you back. Go ahead. You got to save something for lunch. Don't have the whole conversation now. We're going to talk more over lunch. I'm sorry I give you a big question and then I cut you right off. There will be plenty more time over lunch. I want to invite you to think about one more thing, though. I'm going to invite you to keep this conversation going. I want you to think now about some time that you felt really good about how you used your money. Sometime that you just felt great about that money, seeing that money on your monthly budget line or seeing it come out of your bank account, about writing that check. Sometime that you just felt your heart sing knowing your money was leaving you. Sometime that you experienced that, if you've got one. Go ahead and share those. I hope that you will continue these conversations with as much zest and zeal downstairs over lunch. So let me just close by saying this. There is enough among us. There is. There is more than enough among us here. Let's talk about those stories that limit us so that we can let them go, and let's talk also about the stories that flow like a river, that we may live together, streaming through widening channels into the open sea. May it be so, and amen.